Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to this, the fourth intellectual deathmatch of the Convo Debate Society, hosted here on the Constitute Noise Network, hilariously shortened to #CNN. I'm Socrates the Younger, and today I'm joined by Eric Barnard, host of the Free Speech Zone, to debate the question, should General Michael Flynn be pardoned for lying to the FBI? Now, I'll be taking the con side, frankly, because Eric was quicker on the draw saying that he wanted the pro side, so we'll see how it all plays out. Anyway, let's watch the debate and see what happens.
All right. And start. Fundamentally, the issue here is, does Michael Flynn deserve to receive a full, free, and absolute pardon from President Trump due to the fact that he has been convicted solely on the issue of making false statements to the FBI? I am here in support of Michael Flynn receiving a full, free, and absolute pardon from President Trump on these voracious charges. I believe that General Flynn is a man of integrity. I believe he is a man that got caught up in a game of power politics and got caught up in a political scandal that was going to bring anyone in its wake down. And General Flynn simply got caught up in a matter of circumstance, who got caught in saying a statement that turns out was not true. We have no proof to actually definitively state that he intentionally misled the FBI or anyone in the administration, nor anyone in the federal government. Everyone that has worked with General Flynn has come out on his side and has spoken out on his behalf. Know that he is a man of integrity, a man of honor, and a man that served his country with great distinction in the military and for his brief time as national security advisor. There's been numerous times throughout American history where people have been caught up in a game of power politics like General Flynn, who have suffered the same fate, and that includes being imprisoned, incarcerated, loss of jobs, loss of livelihood, loss of reputation. And yet there have been many who have suffered this fate and have received a pardon and have been able to return to a very productive life as an American citizen. And these people go through, and this is a issue that affects everyone on the political spectrum. It affects people in the Democratic Party, it affects people in the Republican Party, it affects people who are stars on their shoulders, or people who wear Brooks Brothers suits to work. The fact of the matter is, the federal government has gone to the point where they are using this action to justify criminal that are simply looking for a way to get anyone. And the best way to do it is to broaden the scope and reach of the statute to where that if you make a misleading statement of any kind to the federal government, you will be prosecuted the full letter of the law. And that's what they use when they know they can't get you on anything else. They find where you might have misspoken, and they'll find some evidence to back that up. And in every case, you lose. And the only option you're left with is to cut a deal. Plenty of people know this and have suffered the fate. And it's a shame to see it happen to such a good, fair, and honest man. I certainly hope that I will convince you and everyone that watches this debate that General Flynn was railroaded. General Flynn was left as a scapegoat. He was a low man on the totem pole that was put out to dry for actions that most people do not see any harm in doing. Nobody was injured. Nobody was murdered. Nobody lost anything financially. The federal government was not made worse off, and the country was not made less safe. And I think the country is being done more harm through the actions of the FBI, through the actions of the independent counsel, rather than by General Flynn himself. And that's all the time I have.
Now, there are plenty of cases where the law, in this case, the Federal False Claims Act, U.S. Code 18, Section 1001, have been used under iffy circumstances. In fact, doing research for this debate, I came across a review in the John C. Marshall Law Review, pointing out a number of cases where hypothetically a person could be prosecuted for such things as lying to someone who they didn't know was a government informant. And then later on they could be prosecuted for that. This is not one of those cases. The law is very clear on this these circumstances. Lying to federal agents is a crime. General Michael Flynn made materially false statements. He knew they were false, and he did so willingly and intentionally. Thus, it fits all the requirements under which someone should be prosecuted under this law. Now, of course, there's more to it than that, because we're not just talking about whether he violated the law or not. In fact, he pled guilty to violating the law. But what we need to talk about is whether or not the presidential pardon, as it's understood, applies or should be applied in this circumstance. So this is a career military man, a lieutenant general from the U.S. Army who served as the National Security Advisor. Obviously, some people in power, people far more powerful and probably far smarter than we are, believe that this guy understood how national security is supposed to work. And part of national security is law enforcement. So it's very easy to say, and in fact probably should be said by any reasonable observer, that if there's anyone who should have known better, it's somebody like Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. As National Security Advisor, he understands how this process works. He should have known that he would be instantly caught. And that begs the question, because it's very difficult to make the case that he didn't know what was going to happen, or that he didn't know he was lying. Why did he go about lying? Because we have to take into account that the conversations about which he lied took place on the very day that Obama announced that he was escalating sanctions against the Russian government, in his own words, as retaliation for what he considered to be Russian interference in the U.S. election. Now, at the time, there wasn't as much evidence as there is now that that had actually taken place, but either way, General Flynn was on the phone with Russian diplomats. And not only is it illegal to lie to federal agents, by the way, it's also illegal to conduct foreign policy as a private citizen. So while you and I may not be precisely sure what he was exactly up to, just as we're not sure why he lied, we can say with a high degree of certainty that he was up to something shady. And we can say with a high degree of certainty that because of the import of these conversations, both in the way that they took place and the fact that he was reporting back to the president's transition team after each one of these conversations, that this was something that would have been very powerful in his memory, something that he is very unlikely to have just forgotten about. You know, this isn't, he didn't lie about what he had for breakfast yesterday or 3 years ago. He lied about very, very significant conversations, and he should have known better. And that is my time.
You know, the fact of the case is what you said is true, that someone ought to know better when they're speaking to the FBI. But the one thing that gets overlooked in a lot of these cases is when you are working in an environment like General Flynn was working in, you can at times say things that turn out to be not true. Again, you didn't know they were not true at the time you made the statement. The most prime example of this was when General David Petraeus, the former CIA director, was actually indicted for sharing classified information with a woman who turned out he was having an extramarital affair. He was actually convicted of trying to make making a misleading statement to the federal government. But actually, in the indictment, the federal government later admitted in his plea agreement that when he made a false statement, he was not making it knowingly that it was false. So he didn't know he made a false statement when he actually made one. That was the excuse they gave, and they acknowledged it. But the important thing about this is that these issues have really, really hurt the United States, because what it's doing, it's giving the federal government a power to expand their ability to actually manufacture crimes. They're using the statute in the United States Code to actually guarantee that they get a conviction. And this is something that even one of the most liberal members of the U.S. Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, has come out and said this is too broad and gives too much power to federal prosecutors. And I believe that when you have someone like that coming out and saying this is being used too broadly, and when you're seeing it take down the people like a General Flynn or a General David Petraeus, and when you have the FBI actually admitting that they didn't really lie, but yet we're still going to prosecute you for it, is blatant hypocrisy and is flat out unacceptable. And for anyone to try to defend that is ludicrous, because the fundamental point is when you lie to the government, you get in trouble. When the government lies to you, the government faces no repercussions. People keep their jobs, in fact, are promoted. And that is just profoundly un-American and unacceptable. And it should be irritating everybody, regardless of party affiliation. And my time is up. Sorry.
Now, you brought up that General Flynn is a man of integrity, and over the course of his 33 years serving in the United States military, I have no doubt that all of those people who came out in support of him are correct in saying that he's a good man, he served his country well, so on and so forth. All of those things may very well be true. If that is indeed the case, what is he doing lying to federal investigators? It's very hard to say, oh, well, he's a man of integrity all the time, except when he's sitting down in front of FBI agents. I mean, a career military man should have stronger nerves than to be flustered by a couple of FBI agents. And if he wasn't flustered and if he didn't misremember what had happened, which also seems very unlikely, then we have no choice but to conclude that he was knowingly and willingly up to something shady. And if that is the case, then he is exactly who this law was written to protect against. This is not a case where federal prosecutors are just out to get someone. This is a case where we have to follow the operation of the law. We're not involved in the court of Twitter here. We're not involved in the court of public opinion. Right? We may like General Flynn. We may think General Flynn is a great guy. We may think that he is the paragon of integrity and honesty and all of those things. That does not change the fact that this law was written specifically for this sort of situation, where a person given the opportunity to tell the truth knowingly and willfully lied about something material to the investigation that was taking place. Now, we can talk about how, oh, maybe he was a scapegoat, he was the low guy on the totem pole, so on and so forth. But again, we're not here to talk about the political aspects of this. What we're talking about is the operation of the law. And under the law, there are processes that you have to follow. You may like the guy, there may be a tear in your eye as you issue his sentence, but nonetheless, if we are to remain a nation of laws and not a nation of men as the founding fathers intended, then we have to make sure that when certain laws that are written for specific reasons are violated under the circumstances they were written to avoid, that those people are prosecuted and found guilty.
Right, okay. My first question to you is this. When I just mentioned that one of the most liberal members of the United States Supreme Court says that this statute has been made to be too broad and is allowing the federal government to, in essence, manufacture crimes. You don't see that as a threat to the United States?
I do absolutely see that as a threat to the United States. If it is indeed the case, which is a completely separate discussion, that maybe this particular law is written too broadly. And in fact, I've come across plenty of arguments from plenty of people who know far more about this subject than I do, saying exactly that. But again, that doesn't change the fact that the law as it is written has to be enforced by the people who are tasked with enforcing it. It's not the role of the FBI to decide which laws are good and which laws are bad. It's not the role of any law enforcement entity to decide which laws are good and which ones are bad. They don't get to just not enforce bad laws. And that extends also, by the way, to the president and his power of pardon. The purpose of the presidential pardon is not to circumvent laws that the president doesn't like or laws that we don't like. The purpose of the presidential pardon, according to Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 74, is to avoid the justice system from becoming too sanguinary, becoming too cruel in its operations. It's supposed to protect against unfortunate guilt, which is not the case with Michael Flynn. Plenty of people have been caught up in circumstances similar to those in which Mr. Flynn, General Flynn, finds himself just for lying, not having committed no other crime, and in your words, not having harmed the United States in any measurable way. Do those people also deserve pardons? People like Martha Stewart or Scooter Libby?
Yes, they do. In fact, Scooter Libby received a full, free, and absolute pardon from President Trump because actually, in the case against Scooter Libby, the government found no criminal wrongdoing. So they used the statute to get him on making a false statement, which he basically had to cut a deal. So he made a deal, and he ended up getting convicted. Now, President Bush would have been right to not prosecute him. In fact, who took criminal action by leaking the name of the CIA operative that Mr. Libby was on trial for, allegedly, that person never received any kind of criminal prosecution, never. So in that essence, justice was not served, and I think that would make Alexander Hamilton spin in his grave as anybody. Martha Stewart, on the other hand, it goes back to the fact, okay, she lied to the government, she got in trouble. The government lies to us, they don't get in trouble. So where's the equal amount of justice in that? Either lying is a crime for everyone or it's a crime for nobody. That's where I stand on this issue. So yes, they both deserve a pardon. My next question to you is, when you look at over the history of people who've been caught up in political scandals, you look at people like Admiral John Poindexter, Secretary of Defense Cap Weinberger, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, Attorney General Ed Meese, H.R. Haldeman in the Watergate years. You look at people in the Clinton administration during Whitewater, Travelgate, Monica Lewinsky, Jennifer Flowers. You look at people like in the Obama administration. You look at the General David Petraeuses. You look at the General Jim Hoss Cartwrights of the world. These men, all whom were convicted and later had their convictions vacated on appeal, or they received a pardon from another president of the United States. These men, all in essence, committed crimes that were more harmful to people's lives and jeopardized national security, far greater than General Flynn. Yet these guys got off. Is that hypocrisy?
Okay. I would say that in many of the cases that you've mentioned, there are circumstances under which a person received a presidential pardon, not because they fit the categories that Hamilton laid out for the people for whom presidential pardons were appropriate. In other words, people who were the unfortunate guilty, people who were technically guilty under the rules of the justice system, under the law, but who didn't really deserve the punishments that they received. That seems to be the crux of what he's saying in Federalist 74 when he talks about preventing the justice system from, as he puts it, wearing a mask that would be too sanguinary and cruel, too bloodthirsty a justice system. And it may very well be the case that these people have been hypocritical, but what we have to remember is that even though somebody did something bad before, does not justify them doing something bad now. And ignoring the rule of law is a bad idea, no matter who it is. And if somebody gets special treatment because of who they happen to be, that is a miscarriage of justice. But that's not what's going on here with Michael Flynn. So my next question to you is this. If otherwise good people, like maybe, for example, Scooter Libby, end up getting pardons for this, why do we even have this law at all? And why is it that the people with high-profile cases end up getting presidential pardons, whereas people you've never heard of end up becoming the unfortunate guilty and having to go to prison for these, what we might say are not really crimes?
I'll answer that now, and I probably needed more than a minute to answer this properly. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of people get prosecuted, while other people who have equal clout don't get prosecuted. You look at Michael Flynn pleading guilty to this charge, yet you have the FBI director coming out saying that Hillary Clinton did not violate the law and her actions do not warrant prosecution. When you were someone who leaked classified information and then destroyed the material that was on it and destroyed the devices it was stored on, that's not a crime. Or the fact that you have a young, low-ranking member of the United States Armed Forces takes a picture, a selfie on a submarine, he gets prosecuted and sent to prison, yet Hillary Clinton doesn't. That's hypocrisy. Or the fact that General Petraeus gets convicted, but General Cartwright doesn't, for doing essentially the same thing, leaking classified information, sharing classified information with people that aren't authorized to see it. That's hypocrisy. And the law either means what it says or it doesn't. Now, why do we have it? We have it in essence so the government has one leg up on you anytime you go against them. They're going to get you on something. And they're either going to get you on making a false statement, or they're going to bankrupt you in the process of, your appeals and trying to defend and get your reputation back. That's what they're going to try to do. Well, in essence, this is their way to, once again, as Ginsburg said, broaden their ability to, quote, manufacture crimes. So the FBI, think about it. It's a wonderful system, isn't it? You can make a false statement, not know you made a false statement, and then the FBI can prove you made a false statement and then prosecute you for it. And they can admit that you didn't know you made a false statement, and yet you still get prosecuted. That is very, very, very unfair, and it's very hypocritical. And everyone says, like, well, it should apply to everybody. It should, but it doesn't. So therefore, if it doesn't apply and it doesn't apply equally, then the law is pointless. The law is not doing what it's meant to do. Alexander Hamilton would be ashamed of that. And, it's because we have laws like this that we have to have a presidential pardon system and have to have people who get these kind of pardons just to show how many more Libbys and Flynn's and Petraeuses and Cartwrights are we going to have to put up with before we finally realize what nonsense this law is. I know I went over my time. I do apologize. All right. You said earlier throughout this debate, you've said that this is about the law, and the law means what it says, and you should be prosecuted to the full letter of the law. But if the law is not being applied equally, then how can you dare defend something that is indefensible? How can you say, well, hey, it's the law, prosecute them, but yet there's people that are getting away with essentially doing far worse things and not receiving prosecution? How do you possibly sit here with a straight face and defend this kind of law?
Well, I think you have really two separate things going on here. On the one hand, you have whether or not this particular law is a good law. And that's a discussion, that is, frankly, once again, that's a discussion for another time. That's really not what we're talking about here. The second issue the second thing that's at issue here is whether or not this particular law, whether or not it's a bad law, is applied evenly across for all people. And in fact, this goes back to the very argument that I was making before. The fact is, General Michael Flynn's case is a high-profile case. He is, for all intents and purposes, a kind of political celebrity, so to speak. Not that he has anything in common with the Kardashians, but more that everybody knows about him, or at least anybody who's paying attention, and everybody knows about this case. And everybody has their claims as to whether, oh, he was shady, oh, and this is being politicized, so on and so forth. So I think it's safe to say that if he does receive a presidential pardon, it's because of who he is and because of the high-profile nature of the case, not because of anything to actually do with his case. And now I'll ask my final question. And my final question is this. Considering that Michael Flynn, since his guilty plea, had agreed to aid with the Mueller investigation of President Donald Trump, and considering that testimony could conceivably become part of the House push to impeach President Trump, can we be sure that the president even has the power to pardon General Michael Flynn, considering the fact that there is an exception in the Constitution for the presidential pardon, which applies to cases where an impeachment is taking place?
Well, the fact of the matter is, a president can pardon Michael Flynn. It doesn't have to be Donald Trump to pardon Michael Flynn. It could be the next president after him. It could be 2 presidents from now. But, you know, we wouldn't be in this situation if, in fact, we didn't have a Russia investigation, if we didn't have an independent counsel, if we didn't have this cloud of superstition hanging over the 2016 presidential election. And we wouldn't have, and General Flynn wouldn't have been in the circumstance, perhaps, if he hadn't taken the job of National Security Advisor, we never had to have worried about it. He probably wouldn't have been targeted. He wouldn't have had to have talked to the FBI. He wouldn't have had, you know, a bullet painted on, a target painted on his back. And in these cases, this is politics. Every kind of investigation involving a politician or a president, you guarantee it's politically motivated. Always has been, always will be, and they will always say, no, the law is what counts here. But the fact of the matter is, Hillary Clinton was not prosecuted. Hillary Clinton was given a complete, a pass, a full pass in this aspect. And the law either applies equally or it doesn't. And in this case, the law has not been applied, and General Flynn is suffering and his family is going to suffer, while other people have committed far worse acts, are walking free and never spent 1 second in a courtroom or even been questioned by an FBI agent. You know, we've had a good debate. I enjoy doing this. Again, Socrates, thank you for this. I'm looking forward to, discussing future presidential pardons in the future and who may or may not deserve them. Once again, the fundamental fact here is the law means what it says. If it means what it says, it should be applied the way it's meant to be applied to. Everybody should receive the same punishment. Punishment should fit the crime. I don't defend people who lie, but I certainly don't defend a government's ability to lie and then be able to operate with full immunity from prosecution. That's a dangerous place, and it's something that is very, very un-American. Good people can be made criminals very easily, and yet a government can commit criminal acts, and a government can write the rules and prosecute us and walk away with no problem. It's a very dangerous world to be living in. And good people get punished. Good people suffer far more than the government suffers. And ultimately, it hurts our justice system. We don't have equal justice in America because guess what? Even if you do have power and privilege like a lieutenant general and a national security advisor, you still can be brought down and made an inmate. You'll be a convicted felon. Your life is ruined. And your only chance of ever getting back into good society is through a presidential pardon. Yet there are other people who don't have political clout, who don't have money, who don't have access to good lawyers, who don't have the ability to possibly reach into the White House and say, hey, I'm being persecuted here, please help me, who don't have advocates who can come in and fight for them or take their case pro bono. And therefore, they get convicted, they get railroaded, they get thrown in jail, they lose their money, they lose their livelihood. People that they know and love watch them get indicted, bankrupted, ruined, all because of politics. That is a travesty. And people on the highest court in this land, the United States Supreme Court, has stated fundamentally that what is going on is too broad and is dangerous. And you see, try to stop me and knock my camera down. The fact of the matter is, people on the United States Supreme Court have said this is too broad. It serves a risk. It allows the government to manufacture crimes. If a government can manufacture crimes, that's a very bad product to be able to manufacture. And it puts a lot of people at risk. And I don't want to see anybody harmed. And I want to see justice done. If you break the law, I want you prosecuted. But if the government can say you didn't break the law, but then we think you break the law, and we can say you broke the law, but we'll still acknowledge that you didn't, and we're still going to put you in jail, come on. Who's winning there? Nobody. And anyone who can defend the government in this circumstances, I shudder to think your opinion would change if you were sitting on the other side of the table, if you had an FBI agent talking to you. I'm sure you would.
So obviously it's clear that otherwise good people break the law all the time. In fact, most of the time, the people who are breaking the law, most of the people in prisons, for example, are there for things like tax evasion. You know, they're not there for killing people or raping women or anything like that. These are people that are otherwise good, upstanding members of society. But, for example, they lied on a tax form and now they're serving time. We may or may not agree with the way the justice system works. We may or may not agree with the laws that are in place. But that does not excuse anyone from being held to a standard of justice. We are, again, as the Founding Fathers said, a nation of laws, not a nation of men. And that means that when an otherwise good person, a person we like, a person we trust, a person we respect, violates the law, that person deserves to be prosecuted, no matter how much we may like them. To do otherwise sets a dangerous, false precedent, a dangerous precedent for letting people off just because we like them, just because we think that otherwise they're more or less okay. Otherwise, they didn't really harm America in any way or anything like that. If they violated the law, they need to be prosecuted in very, very specific circumstances, very unusual circumstances. Those people may warrant an act of mercy. And that's, in fact, why the founders restricted the pardon to the president. There's not a board, there's not a court out there that you can go apply to. You have to go straight to the President of the United States. And as you and I both know, there's nobody harder to get in touch with than the President of the United States. I don't know the last time you called the White House, but I haven't been able to get through. So what we have to understand here is that what we're doing, first of all, before I go there, government officials, because they have so much power, especially somebody in the part of the national security apparatus, they have to be held to an even higher standard than regular people. And so as a result of that, if somebody like General Michael Flynn is doing something shady, that we still don't even know what he was up to, why he chose to lie, those people have to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. If somebody like General Michael Flynn, in the exact same circumstances, was not part of the national security apparatus, they might in fact warrant a pardon. We could kind of maybe finagle it and, cut corners a little bit. But the fact that he was where he was and that he was who he was means that if anybody should be prosecuted for lying to federal agents, it should be people like that. And finally, to fail to prosecute him sets one more dangerous precedent. We have to consider the fact that if we start pardoning people because we like them or pardoning people for political reasons, that even if we say that Trump pardoning him was done in good faith, we have to consider what will happen 10, 20, 30, 100 years from now, when we get a president whose intentions are genuinely shady, whose intentions genuinely are to avoid prosecution for themselves. What example are we setting for them? All right. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you found our repartee both enlightening and titillating in all the right proportions. Anyway, feel free to use the comments section below to let us know who you think won the debate, and of course to suggest future ideas for future week's debates. Furthermore, if you notice in the description below this video, you'll find links to our ever-jingling digital Change Cup on patreon.com. You can read some of our articles on medium.com, which I promise are more interesting than it sounds right now. Or you can join us for a live in-person meetup using the predictably named meetup.com, where you can make friends with us in person by banging the table and telling someone they're destroying America. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed everything that we have put together for you this afternoon. Thank you very much for tuning in.